10 years after Sonos released their first ever subwoofer, the Sonos Sub, and 3 iterations later, Sonos have finally given us a more compact and more affordable subwoofer option, the Sonos Sub Mini. But has it been worth the wait? It's the review that we've been most excited to share with you guys, and let me tell you, I've got a lot in store for you. We've been testing this out in a variety of different spaces and paired it with the likes of the Ray, the Beam, the Arc ones, and loads more to help you decide whether this Sonos Sub Mini is, first of all, worth it, and secondly, the right addition for your Sonos setup. Of course, if you want more information or you want to support us and make the most of our 6-year extended warranty, then head to smarthomesounds.co.uk. Now, if you're based in the US, then we want to give a shout out to our friends at Audio Advice who are killing it over there and right here on YouTube. And if we were in America, we'd be buying from them for sure. So check them out if you haven't already. And as always, guys, don't forget to sub if you find this video helpful to catch more Sonos related content from us. Let's kick off with the price then. Now the Sub Mini comes in at $429, and as we said in our announcement video, that's around what we were expecting. And from comments on forums and on our channel, you guys were hoping for a price between $399 and $449. Now it's a notable drop down from the Sub Gen 3 at $749, and I'll share our thoughts on the price once we've got the context of our review and our results from testing. So this Sub Mini is the smaller brother to the Sub Gen 3, and while it shares a lot of similarities, it's very different in terms of design. Not only is it a lot more compact than the Gen 3, but the cylindrical design really sets it apart from subwoofers on the whole. It's got a sealed cabinet with a center tunnel here to allow air to flow through it. And if we look inside, you can see the 2 6-inch force cancelling drivers are positioned facing each other, and that design ensures that there's no distortion or cabinet rattle. The usual glass of water test showed this Sub Mini passed on that. Now, interestingly, Sonos also state that the Sub Mini can go as low as 25 Hz, which is the same as the Sub Gen 3, but more on that later. Sub Mini connects to other speakers via its built-in 5 GHz Wi-Fi connection for enhanced audio transmission speed, so you don't get any lag or dropouts. Now, I don't know whether it's the new shape or the completely matte finish, but for me, I really like this design. It looked nice in the promo pictures, but once unboxed, it's just so clean. Although it has picked up a few fingerprints, but then again, I'm not sure why you'd need to touch the Sub Mini once it's set up, so that's really not the end of the world. Now, I will say it's smaller than I had initially anticipated, and really is so easy to blend into your room. We've tried it in the showroom, in the studio, and had no problems finding a home for it. It's a subwoofer that you really don't mind having on show, and I actually think it's a pretty cool design. Setup was exactly what we've come to expect from a Sonos product. Simply plug it in and follow the instructions on the Sonos S2 app, and you should be up and running in a few minutes wirelessly to your chosen Sonos product or products. Now, in terms of connectivity, you can only connect the Sub Mini to Sonos products on the Sonos S2 platform. You can connect to almost all Sonos products with the exception of the Sonos Connect, Sonos Port, and the Sonos portable speakers. Now, I'll put a link for the full list in the description, but what we want to know is it worth adding it to any Sonos speaker, or is it better with certain products? So, Sonos recommend the Sub Mini for small to medium sized spaces, and first and foremost with the Ray, Beam, or 2 ones. So we've tested it in our smaller Sonos lounge, medium sized filming studio, and larger showroom. First, let's see the difference it makes when added to a Sonos Ray and Sonos Beam Gen 2. Now, usual disclaimer, guys, that what you hear over YouTube won't be exactly what we're hearing here, but it should give you an indication of performance.
Here we go again, huh? Here we go again, huh?
think what this Sub Mini does well is it offers clean, tight bass. It's impressive without being excessive bass for the sake of bass. So we tested it out quite a bit with multiple movies and video games, and one really complex scene in Red Notice which stood out, which involved a helicopter, gunshots and large explosions. The Sub Mini coped really well with the variations in loudness and the frequency changes. The sound of every element was reproduced extremely well. The helicopter blades starting, the impact of the explosions and all those kind of things was so much more impressive. But it does also bring out the nuances and the details too, and we picked up on things that we didn't notice when the Sub Mini wasn't on. Now, one thing that I think is really worth mentioning is that adding any Sonos sub to a setup actually improves the setup as a whole. By taking on the lower frequencies, the sub helps to free up more processing power in the connected soundbar or speakers to enhance the other arrays. And now that we've tested it, this is so much more noticeable than we would have thought, and actually more apparent than we found in testing the Sub Gen 3 out. Vocals sound more pronounced on the Beam, and the mid-range really steps up a level. It adds more life to the Beam and adds a new layer of immersion. Now, when we talk about immersion, the best way I can describe it is that when watching a film with just TV audio, it's quite easy to get distracted and you're not as zoned in. You add a soundbar and then you're more hooked on the story with the vocals and those kind of things. But when we added the Sub Mini, I'm fully zoned in. Now, we tested these setups out with the scene in Bohemian Rhapsody where Queen performed live at Band Aid and the drums felt super realistic. The reproduction of a live concert was honestly impressive, and then when we turned the sub off, the voice lost some presence and the bass dropped down in immersion. It's so strange, as the Beam Gen 2 is a product that we think Sonos have done a really good job with, and it's still a great soundbar, but once you've had the Sub Mini on and then you turn it off, the performance almost felt a little bit flat. If you've got Array, then adding a Sub Mini will definitely help you get the most out of it. But if you're coming in fresh and deciding which combo to go for, then the added budget for a Sub Mini and Beam Gen 2 gives you a really great setup and a much more cinematic performance. So what about with the Arc then? Let's test it out.
Here we go again, huh? Here we go again, huh?
So on the whole, the Sub Mini does add more bass and the overall performance is better. The same scene in Bohemian Rhapsody when compared with the Sub and Beam combination feels much closer to watching it live. So there's more detail and the overall performance is a lot more expansive. But I think a lot of that actually comes from the Arc. So when we toggled the Sub Mini off mid-performance, you can tell something has dropped off, but it's nowhere near as notable. I don't think I was wowed with this combination anywhere near as much as I was with the Beam or the Ray. Especially in a larger, more open space, it feels like the Arc is asking for more. There's almost too much Arc for the Sub Mini, and that's where I think the Sub Gen 3 comes in and complements the Arc better. However, if I had the Arc in a smaller space, then I think the Sub Mini would be adequate. Now, it's going to be for bigger rooms and those wanting to maximize the Arc, where I think the Sub Gen 3 will be able to give you what you want. Now, we hate to give room sizes and recommendations to match because it really does depend on a lot of other factors, such as how close you sat to your TV, how loud you listen to your setup, what you use it for, and plenty of other things like that. But one thing I will say is that in our smaller Sonos lounge that we've got here behind me, with the Sub Mini paired up to the Beam Gen 2, when we moved from sitting directly in front of the TV and testing it off angle, I lost out on some of that oomph. It still sounded good, but not quite as impactful. When we moved further away again, it was not as impressive. So if you have lots of seating around a room or want to fully fill a bigger space, then you might find the Sub Gen 3 is going to be a better option. If you've got a large open plan space, but your sofa is quite close to the TV and you don't want to fill the entire space behind it, then the Sub Mini might be fine. So yeah, it's not as clean cut as I know some of you would like it to be. Now, following your request, we've also tested the Sub Mini out with the play bar, and I would say it sits somewhere between the Beam Gen 2 and the Arc. It's a more expansive performance than the Beam, but I think for a lot of you, the Sub Mini will be a nice addition to that soundbar. But again, if you're really wanting to maximize performance in a bigger space, then the Gen 3 could be a better option. Now, Sub Mini can also be used with a stereo pair for music, and the perfect combo for this would be 2 Sonos Ones or 1 SLs. So let's test it out.
When I wake up early in the morning, and when I come home at night, everything is covered in darkness.
On the whole, it's fair to say that the Sub Mini adds a lot to this pairing. The bass is great, especially if you like bass-heavy tracks, and the overall stereo imaging is also improved. It offered a slightly different profile than when paired with the soundbars, as it's optimized for this different setup. But again, for those looking to enhance a music setup, this is going to make a lot of you very happy. We've also tested it out with the Sonos 5s, and it was a similar experience to the Sub Mini and the Arc. You can tell the performance has been enhanced, and it does add extra bass, but it's not blowing me away. For those looking to really push the 5s, you might be left wanting a little bit more in this pairing. We've also tested out placement of the Sub Mini and found for us it's best when in a corner on the front wall that your soundbar is on in a home cinema setup. But it still sounds good when positioned further away from a corner too. Now, you do also get phase control in the app if the Sub Mini needs tweaking, if you have a set space for it, which offers a bit of extra control. So I've obviously covered a few scenarios where the Sub Gen 3 might be a better option than the Sub Mini, but I'll try to help you out a little bit more if you're still torn. Now, on paper, both state the frequency response can go as low as 25 Hz. And while the amplification is not stated, we can presume that the amplification is more powerful on the Sub Gen 3, and it's obviously a larger unit, and based on physics alone, the Mini will struggle to compete. So, is the Sub Gen 3 better than the Sub Mini? Yeah, it is. Will the Sub Mini take sales from the Sub Gen 3? Yeah, I think it will. I think for a lot of people's homes and setups, this Sub Mini will be all you need to elevate your performance and add the extra immersion and bass that you're looking for. Sonos have said that the Sub Mini and the Gen 3 will deliver a very similar sound at lower volumes, and that's something that's been very apparent in our testing. But if you think that the size of your space or your style of listening might warrant the Sub Gen 3, and you want to be able to listen at those much louder volumes in a larger space, then go for it, provided that you've got the budget. It's still a better performance and will deliver better bass whatever you pair it to. If you're worried that the Sub Gen 3 might be a little bit overkill, then go for the Sub Mini. You're probably right, and you can save yourself some money. One thing I want to highlight is that you're unable to pair a Sub Mini with a Sub Gen 3, and you also can't add 2 Sub Minis in one setup. Now, this is a real shame, and this is something that Sonos added to the Sub Gen 3 via software update. Now, for certain spaces and setups, 2 Sonos Sub Gen 3s is a brilliant combination. It helps to eliminate any nodes in your room and balance out performance. We're hoping that down the line, Sonos will add this functionality to the Sub Mini, but we'll have to wait and see. Another final thing that might impact your decision is that you can lay the Sub Gen 3 flat, so it could be hidden under a sofa if you don't have any space for it in your room. The Sub Mini, on the other hand, is obviously a lot more compact and easier to tuck away somewhere, but it must be stood vertically. A common question we get a lot is whether it's better to add a Sonos subwoofer or a pair of Sonos rears to a setup if you had to pick one or the other. Now, we've made a few videos on this before, and again, it comes down to your space, listening preferences, and of course, budget. Now, normally, we would tend to suggest rears first versus the Sub Gen 3, as it's a more affordable way of enhancing your system, and you get a lot of bang for your buck by adding rears. But at a closer price point, and having tested the Sub Mini, I think we really need to sit and have a think about it. A pair of rears or a Sub Mini is a much trickier decision. So after testing the Sub Mini, do we think it's worth it? I think you need to weigh up that you're not just adding bass, you're enhancing the other connected Sonos speakers arrays. Freeing up that extra processing power and the crossover, automatically knowing which speaker or speakers it's connected to, works really well. A huge benefit of it being a smart system. For us, we've been amazed at what 429 can do for a whole system, and as I mentioned, I think in particular it makes the Beam and Sub Mini a killer combination. Now, if you were to spend the comparable 429 on a standard subwoofer, you could probably get a better specifications list, but I think what you get from it being a Sonos sub uplifting your other products, the design and overall experience, it makes it feel very good value for money. I do also think that this will be an easier product to sneak into your home if you have any family members who would be very anti-black boxes, ruining the aesthetic of your living room. My main downside is that you're unable to have 2 sub-minis in one setup, as I think that would have been really great. And at this price point, there will be some of you who can't understand why you'd spend the same or more on a subwoofer as you would on the Ray or the Beam soundbar. In theory, it does sound like a tough sell, but just go and test it out for yourself and see if you think it's worth it. So, mini in name, but certainly not what we would say is mini in performance. Let us know your feedback if you guys decide to add a sub-mini to your setup. Thank you all very much for watching.